Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking edition of the Matt Brown Show. This is the Secrets of Scale series where we're talking to founders who are scaling companies, the stuff that we all aspire to. And with us in the hot seat today is the founder and CEO of Movo.co, if you're interested. His name is Jason Radisson. Jason, welcome to the show.
Matt, pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Nah, cool, man. I'm excited to have you here, man. So you've done some cool shit, bro, in terms of like Uber and Movo. You guys are like pumping the revenue numbers, raising tons of capital. So super excited to have you here, man. So why don't you give us the elevator pitch, bud? Like, tell us a bit about, like what your background is and what you guys are up to at Movo.
Yeah, right on. So I've been working in big gig economy platforms for the last several years. I was relatively early at Uber. I led part of the West Coast expansion, ran some big markets there as an RGM. I was responsible for the scale up of 99 taxis in Brazil, which was just amazing. We went and took 30-40% market share from the market leader Uber, as it were, in that market, which was crazy. We built the company up to our first kind of million plus drivers on the platform, and sold it to Didi Chuxing for $1 billion a couple years back. Movo kind of came out of that thinking, that experience in the gig economy, where I was like, what is next for the driver who's kind of not content with minimum wage and kind of a choppy schedule and wants a little more regularity and like the ability to just like put food regularly on the table and level up. From that inspiration came like, let's go to more structured parts of the economy, more important, perhaps parts of the economy, manufacturing, logistics, all kinds of frontline work. And we started the company that way. And, the pandemic happened. This was like right at the beginning of the pandemic. And everybody was talking about frontline workers. We had all of the essential workforce regulations and practices in place, and we were kind of right in the thick of it. So that was the genesis of our whole company, man.
Mm-hmm. So what's the problem with Movo that you guys are solving then? What pain are you trying to take away? Recognizing money follows the pain, right? So what are you trying to solve there?
Totally. The pain is primarily, on the employer side these days, particularly where, employers are trying to keep up with all this massive hiring that they have. And we're talking big companies. We're not, talking mom and pop companies. We're talking big companies that employ thousands of people and sometimes thousands of people in a single building. And for those guys to keep up with all the hiring, running those teams, running those schedules efficiently, retaining those teams, upskilling people, whether it's somebody who's driving a forklift or a nurse on night shift, those are all really challenging things. And as we looked at it, HR tech, let's face it, is a lot of old ERP technology and a lot of spreadsheets. A lot of the world is still run on Excel. And that was really the space that we wanted to get into with our platform, just to really bring, high volume, kind of modern real-time platforming technology into that space.
Mm-hmm. So how big is this opportunity?
Oh, massive. So if you look at, and we sort of, if we look at kind of top-down labor department statistics and everything, like the parts of the economy that are really crunched, the labor markets are really struggling around all these job classes. So if you're talking, basic frontline roles in healthcare, in retail, in logistics, as mentioned, manufacturing, you're talking something like 20 million people in the US. And then, our real opportunity is to be the platform that they run their work on day to day, whether it's, keeping in touch with colleagues off shift, whether it's, keeping track of people on shift and their supervisors interacting with them and everything, whether it's getting paid, whether it's getting paid early, and some of the fintech features that we have, all of that stuff around like your day-to-day life as a travel nurse, as, a warehouse worker, as a food service worker, as a field engineer, all that stuff is, those are all features and functions that we're covering in our platform.
So you keep talking about this amazing super ding dong platform of yours. So what have you, what are you building or what have you built?
Yeah. So, I mean, we kind of think of it as modules, and a big module is real-time workforce management. So it's enabling a company, its HR department, its operations leaders to be able to keep track of their teams in real time across multiple sites across the enterprise. That's one really big module. And there's a lot that goes into that. Smart scheduling, there's sort of smart yield management, putting your resources onto the parts of the business that make the most sense. We have another big module that's all about HR automation. And our clients say they can make do with like 80 or 90% less HR operations people, because just all of kind of the back office paperwork and a lot of the front office process steps are all just kind of handled on the platform. Those are the two kind of main modules. And then we've got a bunch of other features that we're working on.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In a previous life, I was living in London. I was probably like 23. And then PeopleSoft came around. It was the first client server thing where people were like, oh shit, we don't need software on site. And then PeopleSoft came along and it was like, here's a web browser where you can add vendors and add pay slips and shit like that. So I became like a PeopleSoft consultant, and it was pretty cool while they were like, and then they were also modularized, and we would, go into these massive companies like ICI and Sandvik and stuff, and we would literally go, cool, here's a web-based application. Like, what's that? No, basically you don't need all this expensive stuff, and we'll redesign your systems and your processes and your data and stuff. Needless to say, your people were part of that conversation, and we would literally go, cool, well, you don't need these 100 people. Well, you need 10. Here's a new way of operating your business, and for the balance of those workloads and processes, we'll offshore that to India. And so I was doing that for better part of 6 years, and it's interesting to see how the narrative, while changed, it's still very much the same.
It's the next evolution, exactly. Like the ERP makes your team a lot more efficient, and where we're going is your team isn't there. It's just fully automated. Everybody's just working with different bots, and you just save all of that time and all of that resource. I think the other, kind of inspiration and where things are different, like if you look at HR, there isn't really a lot of just the basic internet technologies that we have and we take for granted in e-commerce never made it there. No one would think about manually trading stocks, manually, like that's all platforms talking to each other. Why do we do it with interviews and all these, kind of unwieldy processes? Yield management, like if you have, and we have this problem, right? We have less people entering the workforce than ever. We've got more people retiring than ever. Like it's not getting better. So everybody's trying to make better use of their resources, but no one has a yield management system. And I mean, the airline industry has been yield managing seats for 30 years. HR, try to find a yield management system out there somewhere that's yield managing nurses, for example. There's just, if you look kind of across the stack, things just don't exist. Or like a modern UX, like at Uber, we had this system called Heaven, where you could like really run and visualize your whole city, city by city, and you could zoom in and out and see how the whole city was working in real time. And for anybody that has 10,000 workers active in a city today, like it's valuable. It's super valuable. You don't need to pour over reports. You just literally see in real time sort of how work is flowing in that geography. There's just a lot of things where tech has been there for 8-10 years to do a lot of the things that need to be done in high volume HR. And we just recognize that opportunity that's just not there beyond the ERP stuff that everybody's kind of stuck with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I still think out of all the types of analytics that you can get, like geospatial analytics is still the most revealing and sexy.
It's cool.
Yeah. It's like, it's ridiculous. Yeah. And like I had this group, a company, like fucking bad idea to build a group, but I had this group of companies, and one of those things was this company called Tech Lead Bay, and we had like, I don't know, something like, I think it was 400 million data records, something like it was a ridiculous amount. What we wanted to show for technology customers was like on a geospatial view, so showing visually and location-wise using heat maps, like where is the market opportunity for you to go and sell a Microsoft license or a HR tech license or whatever the case is, and you would think it would be an easy thing to do, but when you've got 10, you mentioned like 10,000, like let's take Uber. When you start doing things at scale, and you've got like I don't know how many cities there are in the world, you probably know this, but like to do that sort of thing at scale is very, very fucking hard. Like it's so hard to do. Like the compute infrastructure and it's a real challenge. But if you can get it right and you can do it at scale, then it becomes like a true strategic enabler.
No, 100%. And different levers that you have, like you can pull the pricing lever. Surge pricing for better or for worse. But one of my cities was Las Vegas, and if you looked at before we entered the city, big convention like a CES, 180,000 people go to the exits at the end of the day, trying to get a ride with a cab. And the lines would be 2 hours long, whatever. People would give up and walk. The monorail would have people waiting there for an hour. We got it down to a couple minutes, and surge pricing and, this and that. But literally, and talk about the systems, in heaven, you literally see 180,000 people head for the exits and turn on the app. And then you could literally see tens of thousands of drivers coming in and taking them out. And see where it was backing up, and work with local authorities to kind of help with the routing and a bunch of other stuff. So just, there's just fantastic technology, and we're talking, 7-8 years ago, and technology's just really improved in the kind of stuff that we're building now.
Mm-hmm. So, Jason, when you think back on your experience at Uber and how quickly that company scaled and so forth, is there a lesson a key lesson about scale that comes to mind for you that you want to share with other founder entrepreneurs looking to scale their companies?
Yeah, a ton of them. I think the biggest one in marketplaces is really, it's all about balance, and being able to sort of be thoughtful, planful about supply and demand in both sides of the platform, and making sure that one doesn't get too out of whack with the other. If you can do that, you can be super efficient. And it's one of the things that I really goaled myself on and really prided myself and our teams on, was being efficient, not being out there burning millions of dollars a week on some inefficient scale up. We did it in Brazil super, super efficiently. Brazil was a great market, and particularly secondary Brazilian cities. There's a really strong demand for those kinds of services, whether it's delivery or ride sharing. There's really strong supply. There are a lot of drivers looking for opportunities. And like at 99 Taxis, we were able to get to our first billion on $50 million. So we had a 20x ratio in that scale up. And it's just being really planful and, kind of planning twice, cutting once way of building supply and demand to really match each other. I think that's my biggest lesson from everything. Maybe a secondary lesson, Matt, too, is like, pick your battles, right? Like Brazil, amazing. I wouldn't have wanted to be the guy to launch Uber in San Francisco. Just a mess of a city, really difficult, trying to keep supply and demand neighborhood by neighborhood halfway balanced, just really expensive, really inefficient scale up. So some of it is, if you get to that C-level position, you can really steer, or board level position, you can really steer sort of the roadmap and the expansion plan, making sure that you pick efficient cities and not inefficient ones.
What did Uber do wrong? It was like Uber, Airbnb, like, oh my God, disruption. It was like a whole thing. You were there in it. What did they do wrong? Like when it came to scale?
The great question. And I think the reality is it's ride sharing isn't a great business in very many cities. I think someone could have built a tremendously profitable ride sharing company by hand selecting 15 or 20 nice cities in the world and protecting them. I think it would have been a really great company. You go out and you try to blanket and be absolutely dominant market leader in every city in North America that's worth it. There's going to be a lot of bad cities in there. I think that's a big piece of it. And very much, my line of thinking with like pick your battles, make sure you have the right portfolio. But I think it's a big part of it. And then, there's really that whole kind of dual apping, back and forth between Uber and Lyft, and like just really hard to get any stickiness in that area. And or like true loyalty was just the barriers. It was really hard to get a lot of differentiation, I think, in the early days. And as we saw, we were spending, the worst times, we were spending $500-600 to get a driver, on the platform. And, you might only get $600 of LTV, $800 of LTV out of that driver. You might barely break even on that driver. So, it's very, very different in kind of the sectors that we play in. If we're helping our clients with acquisition of workers, we can get candidates for a couple dollars, even skilled candidates, engineers, healthcare professionals, $5, $7, $12. Those markets aren't nearly as hotly contested. And I think it's more normal, right? It's more normal for, an RN to work for a new company than it is to take somebody who's a stay-at-home parent and get them to start driving strangers around in their car. And I think that's part of the acquisition cost and everything too.
Yeah. So I just did a quick look at the market share. You mentioned Lyft. So because Lyft were clients of mine before I moved to the States. And it's really interesting. So Uber has a 71% share of sales in the US rideshare market, whereas Lyft has 29%. It's really interesting. I would have actually said that number would be lower. In other words, like Uber would still have like 90%, and Lyft would have been in single digits maybe. It's very interesting because you mentioned that word, like, well, maybe we shouldn't have done it you couldn't have got, we shouldn't have gone to every freaking city in the world. You could have just done like 20 and like created a moat and like protected that.
Right.
Shit. But I mean, totally. I guess where I want to go with this is like, clearly Lyft has eaten into Uber's market share when they were clearly the category kings. Like that was it. They were first, they're the best product market fit, blah, blah, whatever. And they reached this kind of measure of scale. When you think about Uber at scale, or any kind of company at scale, even Airbnb, I mean, Airbnb's prices are fucking ridiculous. Have you ever, like lately, it's like, no, dude.
The fees,
like, it's the fees are insane. It's like, cool, man, I get it. Like you're at scale and maybe, you have this space, but there are other pockets of competitors, just like Lyft, coming in to eat, Airbnb's market share. So with all that said, Jason, when you are at scale, like a company like Uber, how hard is it to actually remain competitive at scale? Because it seems to me, like you mentioned, HR tech, typically, dinosaurs, Sage, PeopleSoft got acquired by Oracle. Now, what is Oracle? NetSuite? I don't really fucking know anymore. And so, you're coming in as a disruptor, and it seems to me like there's always these new entrants coming in to eat your lunch if you are at scale. So how hard is it? Is it really feasible to say that, I mean, I know there are, like, there's some behemoths that just you won't touch, Amazon, Microsoft, and so forth, right? Because they're very, very different. But for other companies at scale, do you feel like it's reasonable to expect that you can be defensive enough to create a moat at scale so you can stay there?
Yeah, I think, excellent question. And, the moats can come in all shapes and sizes. And, I'm pretty paranoid when it comes to moats. I just try to put every possible moat that makes sense economically onto the business and to the market share I have. Even in a company that is basically one product, you can start to add additional ones. So, food delivery ended up having some better moats than traditional passenger transportation, if we look at kind of the Ubers of the world, because you could sign up the restaurants, and then once you had the right restaurants on the platform, and you could be really aggressive with it. Rappi did this really well in Latin America. They just went out and they got all the best restaurants in the city, and then anybody else they had exclusive restaurant deals with anyone that you'd want to order food from. Like you can add, I think you continually add moats. And I think where a lot of big enterprise companies get in trouble is they just kind of rest on, well, I got everybody in 3-year contracts, so I don't really need to think about the moats. I just need to think about my pricing at renewal time. And I think it leaves a lot of openings for companies like mine.
Yeah, and on that bombshell, we're going to take a quick break and hear from one of our sponsors. The Matt Brown Show is presented by Carafin, an investment bank that offers and supports direct private investments in U.S. operating companies. Over the past 20 years, investors have placed over $1.2 billion of private debt and equity in more than 100 companies through Carafin and its affiliates. Carafin leverages technology to empower its community of investors to deploy their capital far more efficiently than ever before and connects their community of engaged investors with worthy companies. Invest portions of your portfolio in direct private investments today. Visit carafin.com/Matt Brown Show for more. And we're back. Jeez, the wind's howling out here today. It's like Cape Town, yeah, even in Denver. So if you are hearing that clatter in the background there, it's literally because the house is being blown over. Don't worry. We'll survive. I have a basement, people.
Good.
Yeah. So Jason, I mean, you've done very interesting things at scale, and now you're getting, Movo are doing like, I don't know, I won't share the number. I know what the number is. It's exciting. I'd love to be doing that per month. And so I have a question for you though. Have you thought about like how much scale is enough? Have you thought about that? Because like I find it's in this series, and I ask this question all the time because I don't want this to feel like a Silicon Valley narrative show, like where it's like, oh shit, like everything must be done at scale, and you're only successful if you're at scale, and you've raised 8 million, you're doing so much revenue per year, and whatever, or you've listed on the IPO. A lot of the guys in this series have done these things, but for me personally, I've recognized that I don't want to do things at scale. I'm not a scale guy. I'm a see a gap in the market, commercialize the gap, build you a nice house, but I'm not a skyscraper guy. Like I don't have any interest in managing people at scale and doing all that kind of stuff. So from your perspective though, what's your answer to that? Like, have you thought about how much scale is enough? Like you could be like a small giant, you know what I mean? Like where where you have the most amazing lifestyle, you got all the cars you want, you can provide for your family, blah, 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 but you don't need to be this IPO ready Series C behemoth, even though you could be. You could make the choice to not do that. So what's your view on that?
Yeah. Oh, I love the question. Appreciate the question. I think part of it is, there's a couple different aspects, or at least how I think about it. One is what sort of your personal sweet spot is and what gets you out of bed. And, for me, it's definitely building companies, scaling companies. I don't think I would be the kind of guy to sit around in a late stage company. I'm not saying, there aren't people that don't do that and it's not a great career path. It is. It's not necessarily my cup of tea, but sort of managing a massive behemoth that's kind of trucking along more or less level year in, year out. That said, like what's optimum? I think there's a natural optimum in each business. Like it's where you have good moats and where you can maintain really good moats. And, that like everything, like it's tech, your team might need to be a certain size. I worked a lot in the cybersecurity industry with less than 300 guys in your lab, in your cybersecurity lab, kind of the PhDs that are in the engine room. You can't really have a viable engine for the world, so you kind of need to have that 300. That's a certain scale and means you have to have a certain size business on it. And ride sharing, like we were talking about, you really want to be the brand of choice in a market and have a bunch of moats around that. So that might mean 60, 70, 80% market share is where you're really super stable and can kind of just always be better. So businesses have that natural scale. And the third perspective I would share, I think, is like, it's like the capital markets one, which is like, seed A, B, C stage companies. It's really about building the company, scaling up the company, building that product market fit, which I think is a process too, because you fit one product, then you need another product for a different mode. And, so you're always doing product market fit and scale up until about then. And I've been in it enough, 2-3 times now, where once you get to like Series D and beyond, it just kind of gets about moving the money around. it's less about building amazing product, and it's more about protecting what you have, and then like global movement of capital. Did we get that extra, B from that particular investor, or, did those two investors throw in their 300 million? It's a different game than actually like the nuts and bolts of building and scaling a company. It feels like that, at least to me.
Yeah, it does. And it's an important thing to ask yourself, like, is this a journey I actually want to go on? Because, it's a choice, right? And I've just found, like, for me personally, it's like, I was like, once I got there, like, I've done 14 startups, had numerous failures, had a couple sales, excuse me, a couple exits, and I kind of bootstrapped it. I've raised money and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, I don't know. I've got this prevailing perspective where it's like, you know what? Silicon Valley can have its thing, and that's fine. But for 95% of everybody else, it doesn't apply.
100%. Yeah. It is. It's that, what's the job content you really want to spend your day on?
That's why I do a podcast now. I get to educate myself. Right. Tell me why you're crying at night. Well, I've raised all this money and I'm not meeting my projections. Oh, my word. It's hilarious. So tell me, Jason, from a leadership perspective, like, what type of leadership quality would you say is most essential to get a company to scale to $100, $200 million, say, in revenue?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think one is sort of gut sense of the market, and sort of, and I always say, like, product market fit, like, it's a two-sided thing. It's what product are we building and what market are we going into? And I think you've got to, as a leader, you've got to have your thumb on that. You can't delegate it. You'll have, CROs and CPOs and others that are taking part of that portfolio and working on those things day to day. But I think as founder CEO, you've got to be driving that conversation and making sure that you're really on point across the company on that. I think the other one, and it's a little bit personal preference, personal bias, like, I'm an executor, I'm an operator, like, I operate. And I think the companies that I've been involved with, we have tended to have, kind of that culture and that drive to just like run like hell. Once we do, kind of know the opportunity, we kind of validated it, we got some good feedback back, we see the opportunity, then it's like, okay, let's go. And then, we're just all over it. I think those are the main qualities for this type of a scale up, and for being efficient while you're doing it, and having a lot of fun while you're doing it too.
Jason, what have you you scaled a number of things now. What have you most learned about yourself in the process of scaling companies? What comes to mind?
Yeah. There's a lot of learning about sort of, and I think it goes back to, like, part of doing what you do best and knowing how to put the right team together for the things that you don't do well, or frankly, you don't have time for, or you don't want to do, even if you're not bad at them. I think it's a lot of that. It's sort of getting a very good beat on where to run and where to delegate. And just each time I work with a new team, getting better at that, getting crisper at it, and frankly, just being cleaner in execution. I think that's the biggest piece. At least, anytime you're saying, I lit the fuse, I've got a bunch of venture capital, and I've got, like, this kind of really aggressive targets to go get, you've got to be at that point where yourself, and that's the piece. It's keep improving on self-knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't let your schooling get in the way of your education, people.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, if you could go back in time, Jason, here's the Matt Brown Show, time machine keys, don't crash it. But if you could go back to yourself, maybe even before Uber or before you did 99 taxis and all this kind of stuff, what advice would you give yourself about scaling companies?
I think, the biggest one is, you've got to, I think ideally, like there's no school that really teaches this stuff. And I've learned that at a couple of different points in my career. And I think my advice to myself would be find apprenticeship opportunities. And they exist. They still exist today. We don't have a lot of really rapid scale ups in the world. We've got a handful at this point in the cycle. But it's really it's the old rocket ship piece. Like if you can find a rapidly scaling company, go and apprentice yourself to the leaders of that company, to, the functions that you're interested in, and go learn about it really, really early on. Because it really just gets better. I think the other piece too is be on the lookout for where things cross over between industries. Because I think a big part of where innovation comes from is not so much like, we're not out there doing cold fusion. Like a lot of us that are out there in tech, we're taking technologies that exist out in the world. We're just putting together in novel ways, and we're putting them in places they haven't been put before. And I think the quicker you can kind of get a good handle on a lot of those existing technologies, the more you're going to be prepared to go and scale something up by taking a technology from one place and putting it in another. I think really those are the pieces that we're missing. And I grew up, I grew up in really kind of modest / poor circumstances. Like I had to find a lot of stuff out. I really spent my 20s kind of hacking it, in and out of university, working a ton of jobs, and, just doing a lot of learning and experimenting and trying different roles. And I think, if I had known, if I had gotten on whatever rocket ships were available in those days, I might have been doing this a lot earlier than I was.
Yeah, it's compounded.
It really does. Yeah.
It's like start now, dude. Like even if you don't scale anything and your first 3 are all failures, like at least start there, because you're going to take, I can promise you, start at 4 is going to be a propensity anyway, or probability wise, it's far more likely to get to some level of scale. I mean, I wish someone had told me that, like, dude, don't wait. Like,
Totally.
And I also wish, like, if someone had said to me, yo, dude, like I remember when I sold my first startup, it was a record label, and we did amazing things, wrote about it in my book, and then flipped that. And then my next one was a failure. I'd never had a business failure before, but lost the shirt off my back, lost my self-esteem, like just lost it all, man. Lost my girlfriend because I went to like this weird funk thing. And like someone could have just like, Matt, it's normal, bro. Like, get over
it. Right. The next one
like,
won't be
move on,
way.
dude.
Yeah.
Like move the fuck on. Like you don't have to be such a willowing self-pity founder who failed. Like you're experienced. This is how it is. And this is who you are. So just keep fucking going. Like start another one, Yeah. And I didn't have that person. It's a weird thing. I was too young. I was living in London and I lost my network and what have you. And I regret that, because I would have done more, I wouldn't have waited. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And there's a corollary, I think, which is like we talk about mafias. I think the Uber one, to an extent, like there's a lot of ex-Uber founders out there. I think the Rappi one is probably the strongest in the world right now. And you just look at the talent that's there and what people are doing. And, there's a lot of opportunity in Latin America. There's not a lot of software. And that company has just spun out dozens of founders at this point. And they were part of an ecosystem where they got to meet a lot of people who were doing this, who had a lot of pattern recognition already. And they learned those playbooks. And, a lot of those founders are applying pieces of what they did at Rappi and learning entirely new stuff and applying it in the market. It all does just really compound, I think.
Jason, what are you struggling with now? Like, we know everyone likes to talk about their successes, but what's keeping you up at night when it comes to, Movo and scaling the thing?
Yeah, a bunch of scaling growth pains. We're at the point right now where we've been running really lean and really hard. So this last year, we got to EBITDA positive. Like a lot of other companies, we really had to focus on the bottom line and capital efficiency and everything. And just like the next phase from there, it's all scaling and growth pains. And it's that much harder when you're in a down market because, and I never like to be the growth guy who's wasting a bunch of money. I like to do, sort of all of our growth in the most efficient way possible. In a down market, you literally have to be reviewing every $5. That's kind of how it gets, and maintaining that profitability. That's the piece that I think is hardest. And you're between the rock and the hard place. It's like, you have to grow at maximum and you have to be profitable at maximum. And, bull markets, we don't have that. You just, go get more capital, go grow
exactly. More. It's like lying
in
a park bench. Here's $1 million.
Like life is like twice as hard right now.
It's hilarious. Oh, that's classic. Tell me, Jason, what's one piece of advice you'd like to give our audience, founders, entrepreneurs listening to us go, man, like I want a piece of the Jason, sunshine, the Movo sunshine. Like I want to scale my shit too. Like what's your advice to him or her?
Early career, it was a bit of what I'll make, the point more exactly, which is go find a team that you're excited about and take any job with them. Start to learn their playbooks. Start to build your library of playbooks. Cause like we were talking about, you'll never know when you'll pull a book off the shelf and be like, oh shit, we did this 8 years ago. This is exactly what this situation needs. That's probably early career, my number one piece of advice. I think, later career, if you're somewhere in the scaling process, it is just being planful. This is the time when you dust off the financial planning skills, when you spend more time with your finance guys, when you really get very precise. Like that's where we are right now. And, I think the market just demands it, and you just got to be on point, and executing in that way, in that much more precise way right now. That would be my advice.
Really good advice too. Jason, thank you for being on the hot seat, buddy, and for sharing with our audience all your amazing experience. I appreciate you, and congrats on all your success. And I really think you guys you're onto something. A one-hit wonder is one thing, doing it on more than one occasion is another. So super excited to hear where you guys are going to go, man. Thank you.
All right, I super appreciate being on the show, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Take it easy, guys. Bye.
All right, you too.